Hello, I am Teri Cohan Link, principal of LINKCO. Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. For those of you joining us from other sections of North America and around the globe, thank you for attending the webinar, How Battery Innovation Creates Economic and Social Opportunity and Mitigates Climate Risk, with Mathy Stanislaus, whom I will introduce in a few moments. This webinar is part of a series born out of insights shared by business leaders during conversations about the current and dynamically shifting COVID-19 business climate. The conversations resulted in a timely white paper entitled Realism, which LINKCO recently published. This is my way of giving back and sharing relevant information I learn discussing opportunities, lessons learned, business challenges with business leaders, and it's part of my day-to-day ongoing executive search practice. These anonymously shared challenges, lessons learned, are highlighted in the white paper. The summary of the white paper is on my website, and you can drop me a line if you're not finding it. Happy to send it to you. In the wake of COVID-19, many of the respondents have been grappling with the changing economics related to their assets, products, and services, remote workforces, new challenges of workflow and timetables, particularly now with the third wave of COVID-19, how to evaluate risk, work product, best practices to reassure clients and protect employees, protect assets, and keep everyone safe, cybersecurity and privacy from offsite locations, how to lead remotely with loved ones sharing workspace and unanticipated demands on normal work time, the changing office environment. And that's just to note a few of the insights, disruptors, and challenges discussed in the white paper. Today's webinar focuses on the why and how the growth of the battery value chain is crucial to align sustainability and create jobs, the key business and policy drivers to grow the demand for batteries, business opportunities born by innovations in the battery data traceability chain, and we're going to also talk about climate change. The next webinar in this series will be on January 13th at 9 a.m. with Shania Levin, who is the founder and CEO of the highly regarded startup CodeC. The working title is, What are the cybersecurity, privacy, and business risks if you don't have control over your code? A little housekeeping. Some of you have kindly shared your questions beforehand, and we already have a number in the queue. You may also send questions and comments in the Q&A box, and if not covered already, Mathy will try to answer those during our session. Let me now introduce our speaker, Mathy Stanislaus, Interim Director, the Global Battery Alliance of the World Economic Forum, which is a multi-stake alliance with a focus on achieving the Paris Agreement goals and addressing violations of human rights and the use of child labor in the value chain. Mr. Stanislaus served as a senior political official for the Obama administration after his nomination by President Barack Obama and confirmation by the U.S. Senate. Mr. Stanislaus is a chemical engineer and environmental lawyer. He has served as senior environmental counsel at a law firm and directed a New York City not-for-profit organization to align finance, real estate, community development, and governments to rebuild low and moderate income neighborhoods and communities of color. He served on the board of the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, an alliance of community-based organizations to address environmental and public health impacts for over 10 years. And now I'm going to transfer the presentation over to Matty. Just give me a second. Okay, Matty, you should be on. And there you go. Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Well, afternoon for you, but.
Hello, everyone. So let me share my screen. Am I sharing the screen or you?
No, you are.
Okay. All right.
Should be able to. Taking a minute, but it should. Doesn't seem to be happening.
Is it coming up?
No, it doesn't seem to be coming up. Oh, the delights of these technological challenges.
Okay, let me see.
Ah, there we go.
Alrighty. Well, thank you, everyone. Again, I am the Interim Director of the Global Battery Alliance. I'm gonna walk you through the role of batteries, both to drive greenhouse gas reductions, to achieve the Paris goals, in alignment with human rights and providing energy access to places that currently do not have it. So this quickly is the agenda I'm gonna walk you through. Um, the greenhouse gas and social impacts, the battery value chain, the battery passport, which is a flagship effort to drive sustainability and responsibility, and the opportunity to scale infrastructure. This is the Global Battery Alliance. Is a mixture of governments, governmental organizations, civil society, NGOs, legal and technical organizations, and stakeholders from the private sector across the value chain, from mining to minerals processing to battery companies to automobile, energy companies, and tech companies. So these are some of the highlights of our goals of providing access to electricity, creating economic value, and creating employment in line with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This is the vision as set forth in a vision report that we issued last September, that we're focusing in on. One is to reduce greenhouse gases in the transportation and power sector by 30%, reduce the manufacturing of batteries by 50%. In order to do that, increase battery demand by 35%. And I'll get into a moment the key levers to achieve that, and to align that with economic value creation and job creation. The last pillar is safeguarding human rights and economic development, and doing so in a way that ensures safe working conditions and eliminates human right violations. So real quickly, this is the value proposition of batteries. The gray dotted line shows greenhouse gas emissions without batteries, and then the green lines are with batteries, directly in combination with hydrogen. And batteries are a key enabler to achieve the Paris Agreement. And just globally, they're a key enabler because the transportation and power sector are responsible about 40% of greenhouse gas emissions directly, and can indirectly influence other emissions.
Matty, before you continue, there's a question.
Sure.
For those of us less knowledgeable about the critical nature of the emissions reductions that the Global Battery Alliance is trying to achieve, Why are reductions cited in your presentation so critical to stay below the 2 degrees Celsius scenario? And why is it incumbent upon the U.S. to re-engage, recommit with the Paris Agreement?
Sure. Well, I mean, why this reduction is crucially necessary is it is essentially 40% of the reduction necessary to achieve the Paris Agreement goal of 2 degrees, and then the more aggressive goal of 1.5 degrees. Basically, we cannot eliminate all the climate change consequences without reducing these emissions. Now, why this is necessary, one across the value chain, which is a global value chain. Production happens everywhere from mining in various parts of uh, Africa, Latin America, Australia, to the various midstream production happens on a global scale. So the Paris Agreement is really crucial, is because none of this can happen without aligning policies, aligning goals through all the countries in the world, working together with a particular focus on their own country and regional obligations. So that's why rejoining Paris is really crucial, because U.S. alone or U.S. not participating cannot achieve the Paris Agreement goals alone.
Thanks.
Okay. Um, so I will just kind of walk you through the next few slides. You know, what this shows both the economic value proposition as it relates to the abatement of greenhouse gases. You know, and I've highlighted a few. So all this shows is that the investments in these various slices have a positive return on investment, while also achieving a greenhouse gas reduction. And I highlighted in red, just to keep in the back of your mind when I get in the battery passport, is those particular areas that can be realized in part through um, digital technology and data availability. So what this shows is that the realization of the 30% goal of greenhouse gas reduction is predicated upon a 19-fold increase of the battery value chain through 2030. So this illustrates the major components of the battery value chain. And each slice has a different growth uh, of the value chain, from materials refining to active materials, cell production, recycling. And there's some that'll go up and down based on particular factors. So, for example, the more we recycle, the less pressure is on raw material. So this shows you the kind of substantial growth that's necessary. And to realize that growth, you know, there needs to be capital infusion as well as accommodating policies and from governments as well as financial incentives. So,
Matthew, if I
yeah,
may, before you go on,
sure.
your research refers to 10 million additional jobs by establishing a circular battery value chain. And would you please explain what you mean by circular? And please give us a sense of the geographic breakdown of the estimated jobs and what types and barriers.
Yeah, maybe I'll go skip to the next slide as I answer this question. So, um, there are jobs and economic value to be created throughout the value chain, right? So from mining to refining, you know, the major cluster is in cell and pack production and reuse and recycling, you know. So when I talk about circularity, and I'll get into a moment, is one of the key uh, uh, um, drivers to achieve a 35% increase in battery demand is to make batteries cheaper. Um, what we along with McKinsey and Systemic doing modeling concluded that to reduce the cost of batteries, you know, what we forecast, you need to reduce batteries by 20+% to increase battery demand by 35%. We need to increase the utilization of batteries. That is, for example, what some people call vehicle to grid. That is, batteries that are also used as a storage when it's not being used for transportation purposes. Extending the life of batteries. So this could include repair and refurbishment of batteries. This could include repurposing of batteries for second use, as well as recovering materials or batteries for the next design, the next manufacturing of batteries. So all of these have potential economic benefit and job creation. So, what this that slide illustrates is the $300 billion revenue opportunity forecast by 2030 of the battery value chain. And clearly, the bigger the circle, the greater the opportunity. And the growth is distinguished between China, Europe, and the US. And this is based on the current structure of subsidies, current production. So obviously, if there's a shift of investments, there's a shift of policy enablers, frankly, the ability of U.S. to compete and European to compete and have greater opportunities would grow. So, I mentioned this a bit earlier. Reducing the cost of batteries by 23% is viewed as a key driver to increase battery demand by 35%. And what I highlighted in the green box is, again, I'll get into this idea of digital mechanisms. But if digital mechanisms and data availability can be established to have trusted disclosure, trusted access to data, you can scale up reuse, scale up repair and recycling by 10+%. So that takes care of at least 10% of the 23% that is needed to reduce the battery cost.
Mathy,
Yeah, sure.
Mathy, may I ask you? So the numbers that you're showing us regarding abatement and economic opportunities are robust. 45% of mitigations create economic value of 65 to 80 billion dollars. Are these worldwide numbers? And please detail some examples of the type of businesses that are currently in this space, and where are the low-hanging fruits for entrepreneurs and or established businesses?
Yeah, so the numbers are a worldwide number, and basically shows the economic value add from investment in these areas. In terms of low-hanging fruit, I would say that's a little bit of a moving target in a sense. I would say that currently there are opportunities. I would say post-manufacturing in areas of reuse and refurbishment, repair and recycling. There's a great need, and there's a huge forecast of a substantial number of batteries that require repair, refurbishment, and recycling. There are also some innovation happening to extend the life of batteries through various apps. So some experiment being done in the Norwegian areas to enable consumers to be able to identify the best time to charge their batteries, both in terms of extending the life of batteries and minimizing the cost. Some that requires far more investment, both public and private, are obviously manufacturing, battery manufacturing in particular, where right now China is a dominant player. Europe is putting significant effort to increasing their battery production. And, so there are some efforts in Canada to increase portions of its value chain. And so I think there is a crucial need of substantial investment to foster manufacturing in the U.S. In the far upstream, there is obviously minerals production, largely currently dominated in terms of sourcing is Africa and Latin America, a little bit in Australia. Processing is still dominated by China, but there's some efforts, for example, in Canada to do components of that. So um, I would say there's huge opportunities. Some is going to require kind of a public-private approach to foster the kind of growth that is necessary.
Thanks.
So I quickly touch on these are principles that govern the work of the global battery line, separated into establishing a circular battery value chain in terms of productivity of batteries, safe second life, and recovery of materials, a low carbon economy that is everything from uh, um, accurate disclosure of greenhouse gas emissions, a commitment to increase renewable energy sourcing and utilization, integration of uh, linking of renewable energies to batteries to greater increase the utilization of batteries in the grid, and make sure that is linked with job development, both in terms of enabling the skills development and jobs and economic benefit locally, and doing it in a way that addresses uh, some of the current challenges. You know, the cobalt is still substantially sourced from the DRC, where um, child labor is currently used, and there's still a number of environmental impacts from the mining of materials that needs to be addressed. Um, so these are some of what we call the bottlenecks of the scaling up of a thriving circular battery value system, everything from consumer demand based on real issues or perceived issues of how long can a consumer drive? What is the accessibility of charging stations, where U.S. is frankly slower than most of the developed world. Fleets are huge in terms of reducing emissions, but also it being used as an interim charging device, which is a focus in Europe currently and in Asia. Regulations and incentives. There's a clear need for financial incentives and accommodating regulations to foster this. Standards for second use, for example, to assure safety. So there's confidence of batteries being deployed into grids. Um, and investments in the supply chain, and I mentioned vehicle to grid, and various components of the infrastructure that is really crucial, and integrating that infrastructure. And obviously, investment is huge. I would say institutional investment that links with public subsidies or public de-risking kind of mechanisms, which then leads to kind of private sector investment.
We
Um,
have two questions that just came up, if I
sure,
may. One of
sure.
them just segues the second one into what you were just talking about, but let me start with the first. So you're illustrating the demand supply stakeholders and bottlenecks with the 2030 goal for a battery sustainable value chain. What must industry and the public sector do to take the lead on overcoming the bottlenecks? And is this even realistic? And can you give us some examples? And what is the balance between regulations, pricing carbon, mandate goals, tax incentives, and private sector innovation? What part do NGOs such as yours and governments play in avoiding the bottlenecks and encouraging global collaboration? And then how does that tie in with the battery passport? And then I have the second question. You want to answer this first, or
Yeah,
you want? Okay.
yeah. Let me ask you. I mean, I think that there is active discussions on the purely private side of how to finance the assets to drive this. So there are conversations about um, financing fleets. So they would. There's a lots of conversations about um, both, for example, buses as a as a leased model, electric vehicle buses as an owned asset that is then leased to local government. Even charging devices and even linking renewable energy, fixed storage, and charging devices. There's a lot of discussion between some of the major global financiers, asset holders to create asset packages that can be then financed through long-term leasing. There is a need to address cost on the public side in terms of enabling, for example, standardization of smart charging to interface with grids, enabling long-term contracts for kind of these essentially energy delivery through renewable kinds of mechanisms. So I would say there is all of those things that need to come together in a more focused way to really enable the scale up that would need to occur. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and what is the discussion with regard to tax incentives and private sector innovation in this regard? You did touch on some of that.
Well, I mean, I would say the tax incentives, like broadly subsidy question, is in deep discussion. I would say mostly right now in Europe and in Asia. U.S. needs to follow up on that. So I would say that there is widely recognized a need to quote unquote de-risk the private sector investment, and what's the best interface of public investment to de-risk certain kinds of investment. So, for example, there's some thinking that smart charging devices should be a shared cost between public and private. Fleets, there needs to be a shared cost. So I think there is a mixture of subsidies slash incentives to kind of foster and reduce the risk side of private sector investing in these kinds of infrastructure.
Okay, here's the second question. You referenced the opportunity for investors to help create and nurture blended financing models. What would it take to do this, and who's going to take the lead, and what's the financial upshot for them if they do?
Well, as I mentioned, there's active discussions around uh, uh, financing and packaging various assets, right? So, and people are thinking about it could be um, uh, fleets of buses, fleets of EV delivery trucks, last mile delivery trucks, as people talk about fleets of passenger vehicles, which would then be um, provided as a kind of a lease service. There's also separate conversations about leasing this cluster of renewable energy production, of storage devices, fixed storage devices, and smart charging. So institutional investors, sovereign wealth funds, for example, then in the U.S. you have various kinds of pension funds are looking at providing, I would say, more flexible terms to enable to finance these kinds of packaging of assets. So those are kind of mixed funding that is going on in the, I would say, private and quasi-private side of financing. On the public side, it's still a little bit in discussion of what is the best form of public resources, be it in the form of tax credit or subsidies, and how that could be earmarked in a way that fosters it without showing any preferential treatment to one sector or the other, given how quickly this sector moves. So that's the current conversation that's going on.
Thank you. Please continue.
Sure. Um, so yeah, I think I kind of mentioned all of these are some of the key
Yeah.
recommendations. All of these are available through the 2030 Vision Report that's available on the website. Just Google GBA 2030 Vision Report. So I'm now going to get into the battery passport, and the battery passport is the flagship effort of the Global Battery Alliance. And early on, for all of the value proposition, the outcomes that are identified, it was the GBA membership identified that there's a need to take advantage of this era of data. We are in an era of data availability that's relatively cheap, data that's secure, data that's immutable, meaning data that cannot change over time, and data that could be available close to, if not at the time of creation, during a mixture of data traceability, data being transmitted through, cloud-based technology, blockchain technologies, and all of that. So what the data passport would be a vehicle to enable the data to be made available to drive a number of things like greenhouse gas disclosure and circularity. So what it would be a digital twin in the parlance of those in the digital world, where uh, at any moment the profile of a battery in terms of its greenhouse gas, in terms of its chain of custody, adherence to key requirements can be assured. So we are in the process of developing a demonstration product, which we rolled out in January, which will lay the groundwork of what we were calling a minimal viable product next year, and then a fully developed product in 2022.
Um,
Yeah, go ahead.
Matty, we just had a question come through. Is clean hydrogen transportation a complementary or competitive threat versus battery growth profile?
Very complimentary. In fact, we're in direct engagement with hydrogen manufacturers, and so uh, hydrogen and storage will go hand in hand. Hydrogen will have more utilization in some sectors than others, but I would say renewable storage and hydrogen go hand to hand, and and I think it's going to evolve over time. I think some people feel that now, for the foreseeable future, hydrogen is going to uh, be more of a fuel for the trucking fleets. Uh, so that's where we see a very synergistic. So,
Thank you.
sure. So maybe it's worthwhile just talk a little bit about the value of the battery passport that we've heard from cell manufacturers and automobile EV automobile manufacturers, and there's recent interviews, and so and these are members of who've joined the battery passport, is that the independent verification is more important now than ever. Is that their claims through the typical sustainable report simply does not have credibility, or as credibility as it has been, because there's a wide recognition that needs to be a direct verification using data. This yeah, I mean, to jump, they're from the largest EV manufacturer. They're hearing from their own institutional investors that the institutional investors want independent verification, and they no longer will trust the company only conclusions. But also reveals opportunities in terms of design and addressing hotspots. So um, in our mock-up, you'll be able to identify where in your battery value chain has the highest concentrations of greenhouse gas emissions. You'll also be able to identify among suppliers which is their performance level, and be able to have downstream companies be able to select based on this neutral independent verification which are the highest performers, and frankly put pressure on the lower performers to increase their performance, invest to increase the performance, to continue to have a share of the market. Clearly, corporate reputational benefit, so being able to assure that human rights are not being violated or child labor is not in your supply chain, and the impact. I mean, so the mainstream manufacturers are having demands by both the shareholders, board of directors, and consumers. Um, and then, the failure to act would result in, distrust, and then what I'm calling misaligned mandates. You could have government mandates which are well intended to address this problem, but may not be aligned in the best way to really drive the innovation. And in terms of what we've heard from repurposers, so we by 2030 we project 2 million metric tons of EV batteries are going to reach the end of life. So it potentially can provide secondary life usage to address 60% of the potential power storage capacity demand globally. So there's opportunities there. In our interviews with repurposers, if a battery passport can reduce the cost, the back end cost of battery testing by up to 75%. So therefore, increase the economic viability of second use applications. And obviously it's a moving target because lithium ion batteries all become cheaper over time. And whether at some point repurposing of batteries becomes economically viable is still an open question, whether you need subsidies for that. So that's kind of an ongoing discussion. Separately, I cite the $10 billion of the value of materials from batteries that if we can build a high quality recycling system to really recover that to go back into a battery. So those are some of the economic opportunities that a battery passport can reveal. So if recyclers can have some basic chemistry data, it can reduce the back end testing by 25%. And the bottom I highlight, the confidence levels of the public sector of governments being able to provide the assurance, direct assurance of these various requirements. So, again, these are some of the things that we've identified as what a battery passport can enable. Data to enable circular value chain, life extension, data to confirm compliance with human rights and environmental requirements, and greenhouse gas disclosure.
Matty, may I ask another question at this point?
Sure.
So we've started to see private industry win governmental contracts to create large-scale battery centers, like in Australia. What happens when a contract expires in terms of changing the systems or needing to update equipment? And you did touch on this earlier. Should the government be owning the equipment instead of a contract rental? What's the current thinking?
Yeah, I think the emerging thinking is that government should not own this kind of infrastructure, I will say. And I think it also makes these things much more efficient and addresses some of the procurement challenges of government. So I believe that in terms of, let's do the basic things like buses, right? So I would say that all buses, commuter buses, school buses should gravitate towards a leasing model where it's easier to finance and it's easier to provide that as a service to the local government. Even fixed infrastructure. So I'm aware of some pilots that would link um, renewable energy infrastructure, fixed storage infrastructure, charging infrastructure to be, provided as a service or leased to local governments at a cost that would reduce their utility bill. It's forecast to be about 25%, and they don't have to own that infrastructure. So it avoids, I would say, both the procurement side, the servicing of the infrastructure itself and the back end management of infrastructure.
Thank you.
And so on this slide, just articulate what the battery passport is and is not. So it is viewed as a public purpose mechanism. It is viewed as a way of establishing an assurance platform. It would establish rules, for greenhouse gas requirements or compliance with various environmental requirements. It would have an auditing and data integrity framework to provide that assurance and certify that way. It would, yeah, so let me just skip forward. Okay, so it would interface with existing systems on the bottom. So we know that each of the segments of the battery badge and have their own IT system, own data management system. So it'll interface with their systems, establish interoperability with that. We will establish data access rules, have it only being on a permission basis, been a need basis where recyclers want to get access to chemistry, repurposers would have access to a certain amount of battery health data, like how many times has the battery been charged, or is there any damage to that battery? And then a manufacturer uh, would need to know a more comprehensive set of data from its suppliers. What's their assurance of chain of custody from mine to smelter? So it'll be based on a permission basis and being able to provide that level of interoperability. And just jumping backwards, so ultimately the vision is to have the battery passport having collecting all of these data pertinent to demonstrate the environmental, social, and governance of a battery. We're currently focusing in on these three: greenhouse gas footprint, battery ID, and human rights. Um, so going. So I'm
Um,
going to say, yeah,
Mathy, may I break in with
sure.
another question? Thank
Sure.
you. You reference KPIs and standards. How are they going to be created? What do you envision they look like? Is this part of the unfolding of the battery passport? And who takes the lead on this? And would you explain how the battery passport helps support and sustain the economic value chain? And can you give us a preview for what you're planning to unveil at the World Economic Forum 2021 in terms of the battery passport prototype?
Yeah. So I missed the first part of your question. Can you say the first part of your question again?
Sure. The KPIs and standards,
Oh,
how are they
okay.
going to
Yeah.
be developed?
So right now we have working groups of both industry across the value chain, as well as governments uh, uh, who are directly participating and engaging with governments who are currently engaged in components of that. So on the government side, it's European Union Commission. In the U.S., it's been California who's been leading some requirements. We have Canada, we have Japan. So it'll be based on ensuring that it is aligns with both the where the regulations are going to go, and in some case trying to influence alignment with those regulations, but also, where do the companies believe they should lead in terms of a greenhouse gas footprint. So I would say the leading companies want to establish a certain, high bar of performance, and so we're in the process of determining what that bar of performance should be. That'd be the basis of the rules that we would establish. Um, in terms of what we would roll out, it's a version of a more detailed version of what you have in front of you. It will show how the assurance platform would work end to end in terms of how would data flow from mining to producers to recyclers, uh, how would the data would flow, and then how would how would the assurance be provided, and how would we look at aggregation of data for government institutions and NGOs. That answer all
Matthew,
your questions?
yes, thank you. Another question just came through. Given the large increase in the number of batteries over the past 10 years, what will be the cost to dispose of these batteries in an environmentally safe manner, even if the repurposing goals are achieved? And how will you ensure these batteries are disposed of in an environmentally safe manner?
Well, our goal is to focus in on optimizing recycling. So the goal is to really extract all the underlying materials from the material from the batteries, and have that uh, done through a high quality recycling system so that can be put back into batteries, and then reduce the demand for new mining of such materials. Um, but we also want to establish traceability. So the idea of a battery ID is every individualized battery will be tracked through the value chain from manufacturing towards recycling, repurposing, to make sure it goes to the right place. And if a battery needs to be disposed of, it goes to the properly licensed facility for that. Globally, whether you're talking about lithium ion or batteries, where you have harm, where you have both public health and environmental consequence, or where it gets out of the system, where it's done by, frankly, third party unlicensed actors who kind of extract through very sloppy means, unregistered means. I would say traceability, uh, 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 oversight, transparency of that system will be crucial to make sure that it's a fully circular, transparent, and safe process. So,
Thank you.
unless there are other questions on that, I'll go to scaling infrastructure. I mentioned these recommendations. And I also mentioned the bottlenecks. I will just talk. I think I touched on this. It's um, while there's a lot of conversations around carbon pricing, and I think that conversation is necessary because most economists believe that carbon pricing would economically drive investments in the kind of uh, uh, clean energy innovation that needs to happen. Separate and apart from that, I think there's a real need to scale infrastructure. So let me take energy storage for example. So the link between solar energy and energy storage is crucial. Right now, as many of you know, renewable energy can only produce energy when the sun is up, when the wind is blowing. And so you really are not optimizing energy use. So it has multiple of consequences. So on the hottest days of the year, you also have the dirtiest uh, uh, um, energy producing units producing energy. Right. So unless you begin shifting and making renewable energy on an as needed basis, then you're not going to really change significantly the profile of energy production, particularly the worst forms of energy production. So having energy storage devices can both store renewable energy. The other thing that it does, those in the markets can also offer arbitrage opportunities, meaning it can be able to store energy at a time that the pricing is low, and then be a seller of energy when pricing is high. That then enables the financing of this whole combination of infrastructure. There's a global conversation, as I noted, to be able to cobble these together and to reduce the overall cost of infrastructure, reduce the overall utility bill by these kinds of innovations. So I would say the innovation should not focus on individualized components of technology. It's how do we cobble that together to kind of deliver, for example, maximization of renewable energy, reducing what they call pico plants, or the dirtiest plants that occur on the hottest days of the year, and in a way that can deliver this for local communities and local community needs. So I will stop there.
Okay. Here's a few more questions, if I may.
Sure.
What does a just value chain look like, and how does it get developed, and how do we measure and encourage compliance? And then I have two more questions.
Well, I mean, it's a great and very tough question. I mean, I would say it's an ongoing goal for multiple of value chains, right? So obviously, we talk about human rights, and we talk about labor rights, protecting labor, worker protection, environmental requirements. For me, you need to translate that into uh, clear requirements, data and data disclosure, accountability, and making sure that is transparent. So I just want to hit this again. For the first time in human history, we have the ability to secure data at the point of creation. So we could identify an individual miner who puts a rock into a bag, who puts a bag into a truck, who then offloads that bag into a smelter, and through mass balancing be able to assure the sourcing of materials. The fact is that we've not invested in that level of assurance, right? And so I think we have an opportunity to invest in. So I would argue that we need to invest in these what I call distributed assurance systems more so, and the less of the individualized company sustainability systems. I know that may rub some people the wrong way, but the only way is to build trusted systems that is outside of the control of one entity. It needs to be a multi-stakeholder kind of entity. And I'll just answer this question that you asked earlier, which I just remembered, is the role of organizations like mine. So it is crucially important to bring together companies in a pre-competitive way, bring in governments and civil society to frankly work through the challenges of what is the aligned vision, and how do we operationalize that vision in terms of requirements that we can live with. The data disclosure that protects proprietary interests, but a level of disclosure that enables confidence in the public and government.
Thank you. Two more questions, well, several more questions. How has COVID-19 disrupted the battery supply chain, and what advantages, if any, can be captured from this dynamic shift? And what are some of the best management practices for risk management that have been deployed during COVID-19 along the battery supply and circular chain to encourage and ensure resiliency?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that resiliency from a supply chain perspective has brought home very acutely from COVID. Um, it's been an area of focus, but I think COVID brought it home, where you had entire manufacturing lines shut down because of the lack of access to particular materials. So I think there's going to be a real commitment to diversify supply chains across the globe, having less concentration in one country and one region. But it has also brought attention to acute risk. So the issue of COVID and mining and protection, and the need to provide that level of protection. And I would say the community development side of the supply chain, which tends to not get it. People tend to focus on the transactional side of the
Right.
supply chain, and not the underlying conditions of how do you make it safe? How do you make sure that child labor is not a source? Without investing in in education, in job training, those are kind of essential elements that cannot be measured by a transaction alone.
Thanks. So upstream from batteries stand primary power sources. What is the current mix of energy sources powering batteries, non-renewable, renewable nuclear, and how do you see that mix changing in the future, and what will be the positive and negative impacts of that on local economies and societies?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I mean, the mix is highly dependent uh, uh, in terms of the region that you are, right? So the U.S. has a certain mix of coal, natural gas, a bit of nuclear. Clearly, natural gas has grown in its significance in the U.S. Europe has a similar profile, probably a higher nuclear mix in certain parts of Europe. France has a substantial higher mix. If you go to Canada, hydro, particularly Quebec, is a dominant energy mix. If you go to Western Europe, very much coal dependent. But what I would say is that the opportunity is to, again, having battery and battery storage to fundamentally shift the need for, I would say, dirtier energy mixes, right? So uh, most energy planners in the U.S., we call them system operators, right? So they need to make sure that there's enough energy to deliver for the maximum demand, right? Maximum demand is in the summer, the hottest day of the summer, and those tend to be. So when we talk about energy demand, it is basically the stacking of the most efficient plants which are price lower than the least efficient, which are price high. But the higher pricing are still going to be needed um, the hottest part of the year. So, but this is in the current circumstance where renewable energy is not, frankly, not available during the hottest part of the year because um, you simply don't have enough stored production from renewable energy. So
Right.
if you have that store production at scale, and I think there's a real thinking about distributed storage, right? So distributed storage meaning that at a community level, so you could have this leasing model or own model where communities or local governments can either own or lease storage renewable devices to be able to increase the portfolio of renewable energy, which then reduces and eliminates some of the dirtier fuel energy plants, right? So those are things that will kind of change the mix of the energy portfolio.
Thank you. Last two questions.
I've
With
only
the
got 1 more minute because I need to go. So.
I I know we may go over 1 minute if that's all right with you.
Okay. Okay.
With the election of President elect Biden and VP Harris, what are the opportunities for the U.S.?
Well, I mean, I think the opportunities for the U.S. are somewhat obvious. I'll be re-entering into the Paris Agreement. I'm really going big on energy, clean energy development. I participated in helping produce some of the Biden clean energy papers. So I think as a substantial investment in infrastructure, working with local governments, state governments, working with energy developers. I mean, I think the Biden administration is going to go really big on the clean energy side and linking clean energy, but also with reducing the pollution hotspots in the U.S. The environmental justice issues where certain communities have a disproportionate level of pollution. So it's going to be a linking of not only clean energy, but also addressing the communities that are most at risk from pollution. So I look forward to the Biden administration.
Okay. Final question. How is your quarantined home project building your deck coming along?
Coming along is 90%. I've learned a lot from carpentry and doing brickwork. So, I've taken advantage of quarantine to do homework, and my wife is happy.
Great. Mathy, I'm going to take back control so I can thank our audience. So just give me a second. And There we go. And I want to thank you for generously sharing your time and expertise to address these critical business opportunities, risk, and climate change issues. Matty's slides, along with a summary and a recording link to this webinar, will be posted on my website. The recording will be posted on my YouTube channel. And at the end of the webinar, in just a few moments, please take a minute to fill out the survey. It will help me evaluate and improve my webinar series going forward. Your feedback is much appreciated. LINKCO Executive Search provides elite companies with top CXOs and upper management nationwide using a proprietary step-by-step process for both clients and candidates. We are on 24/7, 365 when you need help. Please call upon us. The next webinar in my series is on January 13th at 9 a.m. Pacific time with Shania Levin, founder and CEO of CodeC, a technology startup. The working title is, What are the cybersecurity, privacy, and business risks if you don't have control over your code? Please reserve your seat and stay tuned for additional topics and speakers. And do let me know what topics would be of use for your business sector. The webinar registration links can be found on my website, linkco.net, and in the events section of my LINKCO LinkedIn page. Have a good morning, good afternoon, evening, and stay safe.